as we go to local elections, more and more evidence of, I suppose, a collapse, really, of so many councils around the country. And yet we also find so often councillors and political parties, well, they just fight all the time, don't they? At the moment, in one council in North West, there are two people who claim to be mayors, two people who claim to be speakers, but two people who claim to be city managers. Both of them refused to leave office, and they're from the same council. They're from the same party, rather. Another council, Lekwa, has failed so deeply that national governments had to take over some of its functions. So why does this happen? Well, Stuart Mbanyele is a researcher for governance, delivery and impact at Good Governance Africa. Stuart, good afternoon to you. I mean, you've looked at this in depth. That's terrible. You've looked at this in depth. One of the things we are seeing is huge fights, often long, intense, expensive fights. What drives these fights in our councils?
I think, good afternoon, Stephen, and thank you for having me. I think to a large extent, it's how we conceive of the interface between administrative and political issues and how that sort of impacts governance across many municipalities in the country. So to a great extent, you've got an interference between the national level of political parties and within local councils, as well as the interplay between different factions within parties and the pursuit for different interests. So ultimately that sort of erodes the notion of good governance and the delivery of services to the average man on the streets. So that's the problem to a great extent.
I mean, it would seem that money is a big part of it, right? It's a fight over resources.
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, from the coalition governments from coalition-governed cities to the ones that are led by the national ruling party, you've got access to an extensive amount of resources at a local level. So sometimes it boils down to contestations over access to those resources, whether it's at a political level and how that feeds into an administrative level. So positions are used as a pathway to access to those resources.
Is that also why people fight so hard to keep that position? If they lose that position, they're not going to get it back. They're going to lose, literally everything. They're going to lose the car.
Absolutely, Stephen. That's what's at stake sometimes. But the take home from that is how it impacts whether a person has access to roads that are in a good condition. The refuse gets picked up in the streets, but those seem to be the secondary concerns for many of the political actors involved. But the primary pursuit seems to be the drive towards access to resources for themselves. So, yeah.
We've seen some councils, some metros being run by coalitions. Now, I mean, coalitions, I thought at one point maybe with coalitions it would keep everybody honest because you'd be in the same sort of government, the same administration. You'd all see who was stealing what and you'd blow the whistle and use that at the next election. But that isn't what happens. Something else seems to happen. It's been a bit of a disaster. If you look at Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, is there something wrong with the way our coalitions operate?
I think we had all hoped that coalitions would sort of have a number of systems in place in terms of providing checks and balances. But then we've seen in Nelson Mandela Bay, to a great extent, we've seen in Tshwane and we've seen in the city of Johannesburg that something needs to be done in how coalitions are managed. But if the driving force towards these agreements and coalitions is ultimately good governance, then we can go a long way. And that's something people should take cognizance of ahead of the elections and vote in a way that's going to serve them in terms of service delivery and not just politics and politicization of issues.
It's very difficult. I mean, I'm not sure yet what the issue of this local government election is. I don't know if it's going to be around some of the sort of national politics we see, sometimes around identity issues, sometimes around other things, or if it's going to be about governance.
I think generally there's a myriad of issues going on at a national level, and the anxiety over the pandemic and its handling, and a whole lot of things that are going on. But I firmly, in my opinion, believe that if issues of governance and at a local level, particularly at a street or ward level or town level, people take those issues to heart, then ultimately it's going to change the trajectory of the elections and maybe provide leadership that is effective and accountable going forward from there.
There's a phenomenon around who actually holds the power. So someone may have power in their council, someone may have a position in the council, but someone else would have a higher political position in their local ANC branch. Sometimes it is the ANC, or just have more political power in another way. So, to give you an example, maybe a group of workers in a call centre that work for a council are told to do something. They don't like it, so they get their branch members to go against it. I mean, that kind of political situation is very complex to fix.
Absolutely, Stephen. I think we've seen this to a great extent within many municipalities in the country where you have sort of a municipal official who occupies an administrative level, which is which is senior in the municipality. Then at the branch level, they have to take instructions from a senior leader within the party. So that conflation of roles ultimately has a bearing in terms of the decisions that get taken in within municipal councils at an administrative level. So that's a significant problem. However, an attempt has been made to sort of remedy that, but however, the conversation hasn't gotten as far. But you have the National Implementation Framework, which speaks to these conflation of roles within municipalities and how that can be resolved. So there's hope in that front, and I'm hoping that the envelope can get pushed forward.
So, I mean, how do we fix it all? And I mean, it's easy to say that, you know, voters need to fix it. But voters are all going to have different ideas on how to fix it, and we can't blame them for that. You could end up where we are now. Some people will say we need to change the whole election system. Some people just want to do away with councils altogether. I don't know if that helps us.
I think that there's so much value in democratic participation, especially through elections. To a great extent, we see people resorting, like in Mangaung last week, where the extent of marginalization and frustration with the failures in local governance drive them to protest and sporadic acts of violence. However, I think the most fruitful engagement we can have is through simply an exercise of the ballot box, so that we can people can elect the leaders that can move them forward.
Do we need to change structure as well? Is there a problem with structure? I mean, has the structure got us here?
To a great extent, those conversations must be had. But in terms of, we need to have checks and balances in terms of who we give access to the purse at a local level. And that can only happen through the vote. And as far as electoral reform and reform of the system in its entirety, I think in the longer run, those conversations can be had. But now we need to just resolve the whole issue of the political sphere and the administrative sphere. So if you have competent political leaders and competent administrators in positions of authority at a local level, then that can drive service delivery forward.
Stuart Mbanyele, thanks very much indeed from Good Governance Africa. Really do appreciate it. All right.